So it's that time of year again, looking towards E3 2019 at some of the leaks or supposed leaks around some of the up-and-coming games. E3 itself, as well as many of the presentations that do precede it, are just about 3 weeks away at this point, so it definitely is hype time. With that being said, we also are getting a lot of information, both from the companies officially, from users making E3 plans, and of course, from the leakers. In this video, we actually have all three of those things. Over the past week or so, there's been a lot of talk, and really specifically among YouTubers, about getting appointments or invites to Cyberpunk 2077 on E3. Some YouTubers were a bit more cryptic around this because it wasn't totally clear if you could share it, although based on certain replies by official Cyberpunk accounts, it does seem pretty clear that this is okay to be made public. Unfortunately, I am actually also one of the people that did get an invite. And to be totally clear on this one, what it is an E3 appointment, which might not be totally obvious if you've never attended E3 before. E3 typically has three major components. During E3 and oftentimes also in the days leading up to the actual conference itself that you can buy tickets to, you see those presentations by different companies. These are known as conferences. But then as the E3 trade show itself does begin, where everyone can go to different booths and try out demos of different games, all the while that's going on, you also can set up appointments with various companies. These are typically pretty private and only for media members. So what we're talking about here are private appointments with CD Projekt Red, seemingly based around Cyberpunk 2077 that we know is making an appearance in some form at this E3. Now, assuming this isn't NDA'd or meant to be kept private, we can expect information from it to start flowing out on June 11th, as that's the day that E3 actually starts. Although with these appointments with Cyberpunk, we don't know what's going to be going on. You might just be watching somebody else play the game, you might be able to play the game yourself. Will you be able to record video footage or not? I was fortunate enough to go to their last year appointment also, and at that, basically it was a behind closed door appointment that you couldn't record video or audio, and you watch somebody play the game for 1 hour, but I could talk about what I saw, I just couldn't actually record what I saw. And that was actually the 48 minutes of gameplay that you're seeing in the background and was later published. I saw that behind closed doors and could talk about it but couldn't record it. Either way, I would be excited for these days, June 11th, 12th, and 13th, as hopefully it means you'll get a lot of different perspectives on what people saw from a lot of YouTubers that you probably like watching, maybe this one. But even outside of that, there is going to be a presentation from CD Projekt Red specifically talking about Cyberpunk 2077. In past videos, I have told you how it has been confirmed that CD Projekt Red does have something big around Cyberpunk 2077 coming at this E3. As far as what that is, a lot of people are speculating a release date, and a recent leak may actually provide some further clarification or confirmation of that. And before you just immediately write off this leak and start skipping ahead, I would actually hear it out because it is a more interesting one and potentially a more valid one. The leak did come from NeoGAF, which is just an online forum. It's not actually a Cyberpunk specific leak or post, but rather a Microsoft specific one looking at the next 18 months from that company. So if you are interested at some of their other games or even console announcements, there are several details in this about them. And this leaker claims to not really be a Microsoft employee per se, but just knowing a lot of people at a lot of these various companies and gathering information just from talking to them. He also breaks it up into certain sections, things that he thinks are almost 100% going to happen, and then other things that are a little bit more iffy. And he reports here that during the Microsoft E3 2019 media briefing, we're going to see Cyberpunk 2077. Specifically during the presentation, we will see a progress update, as well as a new gameplay trailer, as well as a targeted date. And to be frank, the only real news around this is the targeted date. It's interesting how he uses the word targeted date specifically, as for other entries he uses release date. That could mean something like just saying it'll come out in 2019 or 2020 without providing specific details, although that would be kind of odd, especially for 2019, as we are getting to the tail end of it. And I think what could be more likely, if this is believed to be true, is they provide us with a quarter, like Q4 2019, although they don't know actually which month out of the 3 months in a quarter that it will release in. Outside of that, again, we know Cyberpunk will be at E3. Last year, Cyberpunk was also at E3 dropping a new trailer, and this was also during Microsoft's press conference, so it seems almost 100% certain that the same thing will happen this year. The real question being around the potential release date, or thus here, the targeted date. As far as the credibility of this claim, it is interesting. Leading up to E3, you see many fake leaks, and there's no way to 100% verify if this one is true or not. Towards the end of this post, as almost his verification, he does provide a lot of business cards as well as badges and emails of getting invited to E3 appointments. Obviously, that could all be faked, but having that many business cards does seem to suggest he does have some industry knowledge or insider access to some degree, and it also is interesting that it isn't a Cyberpunk focused leak, it's just Cyberpunk happens to be in a leak around Microsoft. So it's not totally clear what will end up being reality, but either way, I would definitely watch Microsoft's conference if you weren't planning to already. Outside of that, we also did get some official information from CD Projekt Red around Cyberpunk 2077 itself. Remember earlier how I was talking about E3 appointments and getting to see things behind closed doors? Well, recently, Jason Schreier, someone who is pretty well known in the gaming news industry, was reaching out for an appointment to see Cyberpunk 2077. In response to that, CD Projekt Red probably gave him the appointment, but even further, reached out about actually doing an interview around crunch time in gaming and specifically around Cyberpunk. If you're not familiar with this, it's a pretty big issue in the games industry that's been getting a lot of attention as of late. A game being in its final few months of production or even in the final year, and having employees work very long hours or even 7-day weeks in order to ensure that the game will be completed on time. This was a big issue around The Witcher 3, the previous game for CD Projekt Red. Even further, there was reports of this around the E3 demo for Cyberpunk that we saw at last year's E3. I think to a lot of people, this might come off as kind of shocking or surprising. CD Projekt Red has always done good by their consumers, although as far as treatment of its employees, again, there have been some hiccups along the way. In the article, the co-founders of CD Projekt Red detail how they're doing a no mandatory crunch policy. So they might ask you, hey, can you work long hours this week to hopefully get the game done? But if you totally can't, or if you need to take days off, then you are allowed to do so. They're trying to avoid some of the terrible working conditions we heard reports of from several other games, even just in the past few months. And they mentioned that one of the reasons they want an article around this is they hope employees will be more likely to actually use this. In the workplace, there's a very real thing where even though you technically have an option, if a boss tells you to do something, not obeying it could be a pretty big issue and lead to worse treatment because you're viewed as a worse employee, even though you technically did nothing wrong. And it seems like with this article, they're trying to at least to some degree subvert that. It also is important to note that they do pay 1.5 times overtime if you work late during the weekdays, or 2 times overtime if you work over the weekends. Although they are based in Poland, so salaries aren't nearly as high as in the US, so that's not as big of a deal. And overall, I would say this comes off as very positive from CD Projekt Red, although something pretty interesting the author of this article does mention. He reports that some former employees of CD Projekt Red actually reached out to him over the past few months, mentioning that there's actually been a lot of developmental issues with Cyberpunk 2077. And what that employee described was, as he was reading some of the internal issues that were published by the same author around Anthem, he said that if you actually switch the word Anthem with Cyberpunk 2077, it would almost all still hold true. And that's why he reached out to Jason Schreier. And thus, Jason Schreier suggests maybe the reason CD Projekt Red is reaching out now is to actually get ahead of a story that could break later on about bad working conditions. Outside of that, something else that was pretty interesting, it seems like at CD Projekt Red for this kind of crunch period and leading up to E3, there are only designated times when you could take vacation days, not just any time. So some people in Poland will likely have to work through Polish holidays, but could use their sick days or vacation days at a later time. Those 2 gated windows for vacation are actually summer and winter. I mentioned this as interesting because summer naturally is probably going to be right after E3, where there'll be a bit of a lull and things can relax a bit. But winter is interesting, as if they're actually planning a late 2019 release, winter would not necessarily be the most ideal time to take off. And some users are reading into that saying that it could mean a 2020 release date. Although again, that obviously isn't necessarily true, but it is worth mentioning. And one added tidbit, if you guys didn't see, CD Projekt Red recently did release their merch store. I will have it linked down below if you guys are interested. Otherwise, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. A lot of really interesting news around Cyberpunk. I think we're going to know a lot in just 2-3 weeks now. We'll probably have a much better idea as to when this game is coming out, and really probably just expectations for what the game is itself. I'm really excited for this one. I have big plans for Cyberpunk, and I would love to make it a major component of this channel going forward. Although that is pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. As always, again, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys all next time. Later.